This conference actually is not the first conference on Nollywood to be organized here in Nigeria, but it's going to be the most important because the conference calls into question and actually directs our attention to something that is very significant, which is the production of knowledge about Nollywood in the world. And so, for us, therefore, the conference calls attention to something else. Even though we are planning for a biennial or annual conference that will follow this, the real interesting thing about this conference is that we're going to inaugurate the Nollywood Studies Center, the first of its kind in Africa and indeed in the world. This center is going to provide all the necessary facilities for the study of Nollywood. And one of the key points here is that the conference will provide an archive of Nollywood films as well as an archive of print materials around Nollywood. And I see no better place to do this than this School of Media and Communication, which is stable, strong, and reliable.
We have always wanted to do a Nollywood conference. We have always felt that in many ways, Lagos, as the birthplace of this cultural phenomenon, deserves to be the central location for the study of Nollywood production and anything related to Nollywood. It was therefore fortuitous that Professor Nokume Okume came to join us in sabbatical from last year and mooted the idea of this conference. We felt that this was something to be done. We welcomed it heartily and began to plan accordingly. Nollywood has always had serious scholarship attending it, even from the beginning. But the idea of this conference, the significance of it, really is more associated with the idea of the center, the Nollywood Center. This gives a far greater significance to this conference. We would like to do this center. We need some central place for the archiving, the research, and in fact, possibility of global access to Nollywood products. The truth of the matter is, there are various schemes devised in all kinds of places to ensure that Nollywood, which is avidly consumed by not just the African diaspora and Africans, but all over the world, people from diverse cultures are interested in it. But they do have some challenge in access. So we're interested not just in the question of archiving, but in how we can provide the kind of access to this product.
It's nearly 2 decades have passed since the humble beginnings of Nollywood, and the video industry has grown and it has thrived to an extent that was not really even imaginable back in the days of living in bondage. I was drawn into the Nollywood phenomenon about halfway through this 2-decade time period. In other words, in the year 2000, I traveled to Nigeria to resume a research project working with native doctors. It was something that I'd begun earlier in the field, and I was returning to go back and work with Igbo native doctors in rural villages. At the time, I was only vaguely aware of these video movies that had cropped up in the markets during my absence over the years between doing my dissertation research and when I returned to work with the native doctors. I didn't suspect, particularly that these videos, which I had noticed and had not really seen except glimpses of in restaurants and that sort of thing, I didn't think they had anything to do with my research whatsoever at the time. Instead, I went to a village in Vacano in Ohafia in the east and was speaking with a native doctor friend of mine, pursuing my research project, which was actually about concepts of madness and how native doctors diagnose and explain the causes of madness. I was speaking to a good friend of mine, a native doctor, a Dibia known as Chief Ink, and I asked him to elaborate on the topic of money cults, which had come up in this discussion of different forms of madness that, as native doctors categorize them. And as I sort of pressed him to talk to me about what were considered symptomatic behaviors by people who were affiliated with cults and had this particular affliction that he was speaking of, he thought for a moment, and then he dragged me into his parlor. He turned on his television and put in a videotape of a movie called Blood Money. Some of you may be familiar with this film. It stars Zach Oggi. It's a kind of a classic money cult drama.